This is kind of going to be a follow-up to my how to draw a dot in Microsoft Paint video from my first season. Alright, so the first thing you're going to want to do is select your brush tool. You can do that by pressing B or by selecting this brush right over here. It's basically a short line with sort of a teardrop coming out of it, and those are basically the bristles. And if you right click in your document, you'll get options for size and hardness. And size basically means, you know, fancy word for big, like big or small. Like obviously 2000 pixels is a lot larger than 48 pixels, so that's that basically. Like 133 px just means it's 133 pixels wide, and like 90 pixels would be, you know, 90 pixels across type of thing. And hardness basically means how soft the edge is. Like if you're using a brush that's soft, the hardness is 0. You're gonna get a line that looks kind of like this or like that. So you can sort of see that these edges have a lot of sort of fade in them. Like the edges aren't really distinct. Whereas if you had 100% hardness, your lines look like this, or like, you know, like that. So you can really see that that's quite hard. You can really see this line here is very straight, and from one side to the other is very distinct. And if you don't know how to zoom out, by the way, you can hold Control and press minus. When I say Control, I really mean CTRL. If you look at your keyboard near the lower left or lower right corners, you're gonna find a key. It might be black or white depending on what color your keyboard is. My keyboard is black, but the letters themselves are white. And yeah, it's just basically a capital C followed by a lowercase t, r, and l, and then a bunch of blank space. There's enough room on it for Control if you really measure it. They could spell the whole word, they just decide not to. I guess it's just Lenovo trying to save some money with the letters. But yeah, CTRL is your Control key, and a minus key is basically on the far of opposite corner. And a minus key is just basically a line, a straight sort of like how can I draw a minus line? If you haven't seen it, yeah, it kind of looks like that. So yeah, and Control plus is basically a plus sign. You know, again, you hold down your Control sign, your Control key, sorry, which is CTRL and plus, and that's how you zoom in. And Control minus is how you zoom out. So if you ever want to make something bigger or smaller, or like if you really want to look in at something, you can also Control space to get this handy magnifying glass, which you can use to sort of draw a marquee square, and with that you can zoom in on anything. When you get in so close that you're actually looking at, you know, the pixels individually, you'll see a white grid that won't actually come out on your image. If you zoom out, it won't actually be there. Where did this orange come from? We don't need that. Alright, so to draw a dot in Photoshop, the first thing you want to do is get your brush tool, which is this this paintbrush looking thing over here. And you do that by pressing B or by clicking on it, and that's how you get your brush. And you can just right click the document to change the hardness or the size. Something a little bit easier that I learned in college to do is you can just Alt right click and hold down. Ooh. And you can change the size of it quite easily just by Alt right click, hold down, and dragging it back and forth. And that way you can really change the size of your brush a lot. So for this tutorial, we're going to want a brush that's small and dot shaped, which is like this. And then you need to go, you can press F5 to bring up your brush presets. Now what you want to do, uncheck transfer and click on shape dynamics, and this will give you a lot of freedom of expression and creativity in just in controlling the shape of your brush. And you want the size jitter up to 100%, that's good. Minimum diameter, leave that at 0. And your angle jitter, this is where the fun really begins. Before we get into the angle jitter, you're going to click on brush shape and come here. You can see this is a circle, and that's actually reflecting the shape of your brush. We're going to see if we pull that in, we can taper it to a very fine oval, or even almost a sharp point. And you're going to want to bring that out to about a medium sort of kidney bean shape, which is perfect for us. That's going to be great. And then come back in your shape dynamics, and this is your angle jitter. So as you can see down here in this part of the screen, as the angle changes, as you hold the brush down and drag it across the screen, if the angle jitter is set to maximum, then the angle is going to change quite a bit. Now if you didn't have that, if you had no angle jitter, you know, it's just basically all you're doing is repeating that oval shape over and over again. It's not on a pivotal fulcrum point. And we definitely want as much of that as possible. And next you're going to want to turn on scattering. And what scattering does is it will scatter your potato-sized points all over the place, which is great. And you can turn that all the way up, and you can really see, ooh, we're lagging a bit here, the sort of effect that this has. Now this is quite a lot of ovals. This is not really the effect we kind of want. So we want to delete that. Just fill it with white, which is fine to do. And we're going to need a dual brush. And what a dual brush will do is it's kind of like it puts one brush inside of another brush. So I believe we've got, we're going to use the letter C. And if you can change the spacing, you can kind of see how this works. Because you can really clamp it down. There you go. That's great. Now we drag that around, and if we zoom in here, you can see that these are all filled with the letter C, which is really great because that allows you to create sort of potato-shaped ovals in great numbers that have little letter C's inside of them. So you're going to want to go ahead and fill up as much as you can of your page with this. And let it process there. That's great. Alright, we're looking good so far. Now, what I want you to do is to right-click your layer. Right-click that and press Duplicate Layer. And I want you to name this Layer underscore Layer 1 dash capital N E W underscore Layer 01 and press enter. So basically what that did is it made a new layer that's exactly the same as the layer that's underneath it. And then I want you to hold Control, the CTRL key, and press I. And what that'll do is that'll invert your layer. Now what we have is sort of an inverted layer. And that's great. And then this little thing up here that says normal, it means the blending mode. So you need to come up and change your inverted layer to lighter color mode. And what that'll do, these different blending modes, this just changes the way the pixels interact with the pixels that are below them. And what lighter color has done for us is it's turned all of our weird black mass into sort of a putty colored kind of a blob, which isn't really too nice. So what we're going to want to do is duplicate this layer again. We're going to use a keyboard shortcut, Control J. And what you're going to do is you're going to right click it again and convert it to a smart object. It's something that you can apply filters to, and then the filters, you can still edit them and change them after the fact. Any filters you apply to a layer that's not a smart object is just kind of, it's done and it's there. So you're going to want to apply a Gaussian blur, change it to hard light. Then you see you've got kind of a weird glow thing here that's going on. And hold Alt and double click this lock to get rid of that. And then select all these layers by holding Shift, and if you don't know how to do that, just select the bottom layer, hold Shift, and click the top layer. And then that'll select all of them. And then you press Control G. There you go. And that'll call Group 1. Then I want you to right click that and duplicate group. And Group 1 copy is going to be called, I want you to rename it to layer underscore 1 underscore capital L lowercase l dash group dash 1. Hit enter. And then to merge that down or flatten it is Control E. So then you have one layer that represents all your other layers. And you're going to rename this layer, well, layer underscore group copy underscore 0 dash 2. That's really important. Alright, next what you're going to do is you need to go to image mode and change to RGB color, and that'll rasterize some of your effects, which is great. Now we're in a different color mode, and this will allow us to do something rather interesting. You need to select your magic wand by pressing W or by clicking this thing that kind of looks like, I don't know, a starfish with a straw or something, which is great. And then just make sure your tolerance is really high, roughly 52 I think will do it. And just click anywhere in your putty here. And what the magic wand does is it looks for pixels that are similar to the ones to what you click. And it'll basically create a really big selection, as you can see denoted by this this little blinking boundary here we call a Marquee Line. And that's great. And then hold Shift, press F6, and this will let you feather your selection. And we're going to feather this quite a bit. We're going to feather it by 25 pixels. And press Control T to bring up your transform options. And up here, you're going to see a sort of frowning face with some squares that are kind of curved. You're going to want to click that because that'll let you warp your selection. Now, these are Bezier handles, or Bezier, depending on if you're pronouncing it that way. And you can grab them, and although the pixels in this area are anchored to this corner, and this corner, and this corner, and this corner, but you can sort of play around with it and move them in different ways. And what that'll do is it'll warp your image into kind of more of what we want here. There we go. We just want to create a really kind of wave-like thing. And press enter to commit to that. Alright, and this looks really good to me. I think this is good. Now, those gray checkerboards you're seeing in the background are actually they basically represent alpha or nothingness. That's just basically Photoshop telling you that there's nothing underneath that. And we don't want that at all. That's not good. So if you just press Control J a bunch of times, it'll duplicate all your layers, and any part that's not 100% opaque will sort of stack on top of one another, and that'll just be kind of starting to fill in a bit, which is much better than it was. And then you see we've got all these layers over here that's not too pretty to look at. So if you just want to make all those layers into one layer, you can just press Control Shift E, and that'll just make one layer, so you don't have to look at all of this and just count numbers, and it's not a good thing to do. Alright, next what we're going to do is we need to go back to CMYK mode. And that basically means cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. They can't call it black with the B because it's too confusing from RGB color, which is red, green, and blue. And this is basically the color space used by printers and fax machines and telephones and stuff like that, and the internet. Alright, I want you to copy the layer again, but this time we're going to rename it. You're going to call it layer _2 and commit to that. And we're going to make a new adjustment layer. And to make an adjustment layer, you'll find a circle that's half black and half gray. That's right down here. And we've got a whole bunch here we can make. But we're going to take a hue saturation. And what this does, it allows you to change a color to any other color you might want it to be. For instance, if we made a really saturated blue, which this is, that looks great. Alright, but what we're going to do is we're going to mask out part of this layer, and to do that you select this white part and then you bring our handy brush back, and if you paint on that, what you can see happening is the black in our mask becomes transparent and the white is opaque. So basically anything you paint black in here becomes see-through. So we can see by turning the layer on and off that we're making a nice hole. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to duplicate our hue adjustment layer, and we're going to want to change that to probably a nice forest green. This looks good to me, I think. And then we're going to come back to the mask, and it's about time we change this brush. We don't really need a dual brush or scattering anymore, but we want something that's a little lumpy and not too hard. Because what we're going to do is we're going to add to the mask that we had before, just so we see some more colors coming out. And then duplicate it again, and do the same thing. And once more. And a fifth one, and I think this should serve us. Alright, we're going to group these just by selecting them all and pressing Ctrl G, and you're going to call this 1 underscore group dash layer underscore 1 plus underscore 2 underscore dash underscore, underscore. There we go. And copy that and Control E to merge it, so you don't have to think so hard. Just remember that this one layer is the same as all of these combined, and just kind of forget that we have that there. Now you're gonna want your Marquee tool, which you can get by clicking this this sort of square with holes in it, or just by pressing M. And you're gonna want to draw. Make sure you select first just the gray square, the first option we have up top here, and that's just a make a selection sort of tool. And as you can see, you select something, and then if you want to select something else, you lose what you had before, and that will come into play later. So you just want to drag that over everything. And if you come up here to these three options again, we've got an option here which is a dark square sort of over the top of a lighter gray square. That is the subtract from selection option. You're going to want to click that and then drag small stripes at arbitrary intervals, sort of just throughout your image here. And some of them should be really thin, and some of them should be really fat. And I think that's great. Next, what you're going to want to do is hold Control and press J. And what that'll do is it'll copy from the layer that you had selected, but it will only give you the parts that were inside your selection. Now, isn't that really neat? And you're going to need to go to Filter, Pixelate Mosaic. And this will allow you to create sort of a pixely square effect. And you want the cell size to be quite small, just so you can kind of see. Yeah, I think that's great. And you need to change this to hard light mode in your blending modes, which is over here. So you can see the effect that that has had by stepping back and forward. Alright, next, select them all, group it again. You're going to want to rename this group _3 _ 3 _ grouped dash layers. Press enter, or return if you're using a max. And copy that, press Control E. Alright, now next, go to your filters again. We're going to do a really fun one called Liquify. And this is really important. And you're going to want to go to this twirl clockwise tool and drag it out so it's nice and big, and then wiggle it around. Make sure your brush density is really high, brush rate is high, brush size is high. There you go. And what this will do is this will swirl around everything that you've got going on here. And you don't need very much. Alright, next, you need to go into your channels. And what this will show you is whatever color space you're working in, what you're really dealing with in terms of the individual channels of color. Because a CMYK image is made up of a cyan channel, magenta channel, as we discussed earlier, yellow, and black. Now I want you to select your magenta, press Control A to select everything, Control C to copy. Then come back to your layers and paste that in. Nothing happened. Fuck me. And press Control N. And what this is basically going to do is going to bring up a dialog box to create a new document, and you're just going to call this document _ text _ Photoshop dash 1 dash how to draw a dot _ v dash 1.1. And then you just want to Control V. So what this will give you in black and white is basically in terms of where the light and shadows are following the magenta channel of your image. So you're going to want to select all of that, copy it, bring it back in. Create a new layer by Control Shift N, and you want to name this V _ there. And Control V that in. Now basically you've got the magenta layer here up top. And you need to change this to subtract. Now what we've got here is mostly black, which is what we want. So now what we need to do is merge them all down. Now we're going to make a layer mask. So you come down here and click on the flag of Japan, and that will bring up a sort of white rectangle up here. And as we discussed before, if you paint with black into a layer mask, that part will become transparent, which is great. And bring that layer back up that we had underneath. There we go. That's great. And you don't want to get rid of all of this black. You want to leave some of it in, obviously. You just want to break it up a little bit into chunks that are going to be a little bit more digestible for us later on in step 2. And copy those 2 layers and merge them down, just so you know exactly what you've got here. And you're going to want to press Ctrl A to select all, Ctrl T to bring up your transform options. And just grab the center right and drag over. Drag it over, drag it out, until you've got something that sort of looks like that. And I think that's great. Alright, and you need to rename this layer to renamed underscore layer. And next, what you're going to do is you're going to copy this layer, but you rename it renamed layer underscore low FRQ, which means low frequency. And Control J, rename this to high FRQ for high frequency. You're going to hide that layer by clicking on the eye, and you're going to turn the low frequency layer into a smart object. And you're going to apply a filter called box blur. And for the radius, you're going to want 25. Don't worry, we can change that later, or you can even turn it on and off, because it's a smart object and it allows us to do that. And you're going to turn your high frequency layer back on, and what you're going to do is you're going to apply image. This is in your image options. You're going to apply the image to our low frequency layer. Make sure to select that. And channel, we're going to be dealing with cyan only, and the blending mode is subtract. Now this is going to look a little strange at first, bear with me. Scale needs to be set to 2 and offset is 128, because you can't go much higher than that. And press OK. And you're going to change the blending mode of your high frequency layer to linear light. This is really important. Next we're going to group these down. You're going to rename this to group underscore 16-1 underscore V 2.2. And you're going to want to copy that with Control J. Next, we're going to do a little bit of burning and dodging. And the best way to do that is to create an empty new layer with Control Shift N. Press Shift F5 to get your fill options and fill it with 50% gray. Next, you're going to want to get your burn tool, which looks like a hand kind of pinching. Get it nice and big. Set your exposure to 12%. And change this layer to overlay. I'm going to rename this layer burn, and then copy that layer, call it dodge. Alright, hide that top layer and come into your burn layer, and you can see having a gray layer on overlay is not really going to affect your image very much, but if you paint on that with your burn, nothing happens. So you're going to turn your exposure up very high, and what you can see is this is darkening colors and really adding some intensity. And what you're going to want to do is arbitrarily paint in some darker parts. I think that's great. Next, you're going to want to turn your dodge layer back on and get your dodge tool, which is kind of like a magnifying glass, sort of deceptively, but that's not what it is. And turn the exposure up very high. Let's just try 81. And you can see this kind of has the opposite effect in terms of luminosity. It'll basically make things brighter instead of darker. And what you're going to want to do is add some bright parts to this image. Alright, I think that's great. You want to merge everything down into one layer, and this needs to be renamed to layer underscore 1 dash 1 dash 1 dash 1 underscore dash underscore 1. And next, what you need to do is to copy this layer. Next, what you need to do is go to Image, Mode, and bring us back into RGB color, which is this is a really classic color space. It's been around since 2007, and it's just, it's really great because it has red, green, and blue. Now that we're back in RGB mode, we're going to need to create a new layer, and this is just going to be an empty layer. Then you're going to come over here to your brush color palette, and you can sort of change these colors kind of arbitrarily, and you can sort of feel free to express yourself here. I want you to pick 2 colors. I'm going to go with red and yellow. My second color here is going to be a nice yellow, maybe a bit more mustardy. I'm okay with that. There we go. Next, you're going to go to Filter, Render, Clouds, and what that will do is that will create clouds using your 2 colors that you chose. You want to call this layer, spell it right, clouds underscore shit underscore 1, and you want to pull this layer underneath layer underscore 1 dash 1 dash 1 dash 1 underscore dash underscore 1, and then I need you to double click that layer to bring up your layer style and blending options. And what you want to do is blend out the shadows of this layer, because we want to get rid of these black clouds and bring in our golden clouds that are underneath. So if you hold Alt and grab the right hand arrow of the black part, you can pull that out a bit. And basically what this controls is if the highlights or the shadows are opaque or transparent, sort of layer for layer. You've got, you basically have unlimited control in terms of that. So let's just say, we don't want the shadows of this layer. You can just pull it all the way up. And these arrows can separate, so you can soften that hard cut. Because if you leave them together, it'll give you a much more definite response, but you can see those pixels. That's quite ugly, isn't it? That's not nice at all. So thankfully Photoshop gives us the option to separate these 2 buttons, which is just really great. And in RGB, it'll give you these options, because you can, not just for highlights and lowlights, but for certain colors as well. Let's just say we don't want our green highlights to show. You can pull this arrow out. But that's just for educational purposes. Of course, we want our green highlights. So press OK. And zoom out. Zoom in. If you can, move to the other side of the room and just look at it from far away, because when you're looking at something in Photoshop, you're looking at it from a certain perspective that no one else is really going to share in the future, because they're going to be looking at it, on the Facebook, on the Instagram, on Tumblr, and they're not going to really, they're going to have a different view of it, because it'll be smaller, it'll be compressed, and Facebook will compress it, and it'll be different. So look at it small and look at it big, unless obviously, you're making your dot for a magazine or something. It'll be printed in a large format for a billboard or something. That'll be something a little bit different. So basically what I want you to do is flatten all these layers and rename it layer underscore flat underscore 1 dash 0. Enter to commit to that. And then we're going to create a really cool new adjustment layer called a Vibrance layer. And what this will allow you to do is turn the vibrance and saturation up. And the distinction between vibrance and saturation is just the saturation value of every color, sort of on a scale from, completely gray to completely the highest level of saturation. And that'll change it for all of them. What Vibrance does is it wants to saturate more the tones and colors that are less saturated. So it's kind of seeks a balance, whereas saturation, like let's just say if we had a hue saturation layer and we just selected our cyans and our blues individually and brought the saturation down to 0, we can see what this layer has done is it's desaturated everything within the sort of cyan blue range. And if we only put that on 50% opacity, then it's only doing it halfway. So if we go to our vibrance and bring the vibrance all the way up, but lower the saturation, you can sort of see that it's being evened out. If we bring the saturation all the way up and lower the vibrance, then you can sort of see the blue is still sort of failing. So what we want is we want something high vibrance, low saturation. And you want to change this to color mode, so it won't mess with our luminosity, because we're going to do our luminosity with another adjustment layer, a curves layer, and this sort of represents how bright are the highlights and how dark are the shadows. All the shadows are down here and all the whites are up here. So basically this endpoint dictates what digital white kind of means. And if you're telling Photoshop that you want a very low threshold for a light pixel to be, sort of decreed as pure white, you can pull that out and all the way out. And oh, here we go. So yeah, basically what you want is your curved graph to just look like a really stark corner here, so that you just get a nice clean white background here. And merge that down and rename this white underscore down underscore layer dash 1.1. And oh, that needs to be an underscore. Control I to invert it, so this layer is it's black. And come up to your marquee selection tool. If you hold down on it, it'll give you some different options. And this is the elliptical marquee tool. And next you're going to want to press Control R, which will give you your guides. And you can pull from the side or from the top. And what that'll do is it'll allow you to put lines over your drawing that don't actually, export as part of it. So pull down from the top. You'll notice it'll sort of stop in the middle, just because Photoshop knows, a lot of times people are trying to find the exact center of something. And same for a vertical line. And you want to find the exact center of your image. And then you can zoom in a bit if you find that helps. You want to place your marquee selector tool as close to the middle as you can get. Hold it down. Hold Control, Alt, and Shift, and pull out. And what Alt does, I've let go of the Alt button. What the Alt button does is it keeps your selection centered on where you initially put your mouse down. And what the Shift key does is it keeps you in like an even radius. Like you can see here, we're going really crazy with ovals, sort of Pringle shapes and asparagus shapes and frisbee shapes, and it's not what we want. So if we hold down Shift, you're golden. So we're going to want to bring that out until it's just barely not touching the top. And then you want to clear guides. If you don't have a keyboard shortcut set up by custom, which by default you do not, you can just go View, Clear Guides, which is right there, but I recommend installing a keyboard shortcut for that. And next, you're going to want to press Control-Shift-I to invert the selection. Alternatively, just right-click your selection and press Select Inverse. And then delete it with the Delete key. And next, press Control-J. and Control I, and this will give you a white area. Press Control T. That'll give you your transform options. Hold Alt and Shift and grab this corner and pull it all the way out until white fills our frame again. And rename this black down. And pull this back up on top. And press your Control T. And what you're gonna want to do is come up into this is your width and height. You're going to change both of those to 50%. Press Enter. And you can see that we're almost done. Just press Control Shift T to redo the transform. And again, and again, and once more. And that is how you make a dot in Photoshop C6. In the new edition for Photoshop Creative Cloud, I believe there are some different techniques within the new software for creating dots, but this is the most efficient technique within Photoshop CS6. So thanks for watching. I hope you found the tutorial useful. Feel free to ask me any questions in the comment section. And make sure to tune in next week, and I will show you how to draw a line